Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Ukrainian show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and I have today Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Here I am. Okay.
Okay.
Good to see you.
Good to see you as always. Jonathan, there are a lot of things going on right now in Europe. Everybody is visiting sometimes 2-3 countries a day. Zelensky is going to first to Czech Republic, then Slovak. Finally, the decision been made that he will participate in the NATO summit in Vilnius. And now even U.S. heavyweight, your president, Joe Biden is going now to England to meet his counterpart, Prime Minister Sunak. So a lot of diplomacy is going on, and all that being preparation to this NATO summit. There are a lot of expectations on that. I don't know, for each expectation, you will have probably just as many arguments why that should not happen. And there are several arguments, and very well thought out arguments, and others are not so well. But to tell the truth, Jonathan, if you would believe that there would be a supercomputer and you would load all available information to this computer and let him work for a day or two to come up with the optimal decision for everybody what to do next, what do you think would happen?
That reminds me of a story back during the Vietnam War, where they loaded all this information of the comparative capabilities of the U.S. and North Vietnam and so forth, and Lyndon Johnson put the question to the computer, well, when will we win? And the computer responded, you won back in 1964. So that's why I'm always skeptical of loading all information into a supercomputer. The computer cannot do your thinking for you, and it isn't very. And I also am very skeptical about the so-called computer climate models that are supposed to be predicting, climate change, and this in spite of the fact that weather forecasters cannot forecast the weather accurately out to as much as one or 2 weeks. They can't tell you what the weather is exactly going to be. And yet you have climate scientists who claim they know what the climate is going to be a decade from now, or even 20 to 30 years from now. And on the basis of very flawed computer climate models. These are all generated by climate models. And yet we try to reverse engineer these models. The models can't even predict or tell you what happened accurately in the past. So I am very skeptical of any attempt to predict using strictly a computer model or a computer program, no matter how powerful it is. It does not have independent insight or intuition or be able to account for nuance. So that's why I'm also still a little skeptical of the utility of AI. AI, up to a certain extent, that can be very useful in certain situations, such as if we were to gain the capabilities to send a spacecraft on long-range missions to, say, the nearest star system. An AI crew, no live crew, but just AI crew could be programmed to function and carry out the functions and gather information and send us very valuable insights about the neighboring star system once it finally reached there. And you wouldn't have to worry about such things as logistics, such as how to keep the crew fed and entertained and on such a long voyage, because it would be a really long voyage unless we got to near light speed, and that's a ways off. So anything having to do with a supercomputer for making predictions, you know, there is still no substitute for a well-educated analyst or a
for
group of
several for
well-educated analysts.
several analysts to
Several
check and
well-educated,
balances, except that the half of the analysts will start fight with another half of analysts.
and that by the way is that way by the way is one of the key assumptions in my LAMP method, my analytic method for prediction, because you have to have a group of well-educated analysts in order to be able to study and accurately replicate the free will thought patterns of the national actors involved.
Absolutely.
But it puts a premium on research and education. But in any case, all the diplomacy that is going on right now is there's a great deal of posturing going on, and I still believe that the key is going to be how successful Ukraine's counteroffensive is going to be. It is proving to be, it's not living up to the excessive expectations of some, but Ukraine never intended to live up to excessive expectations. They were going to be very cautious, and they were going to be they've been holding their reserve, their best forces in reserve, waiting for the proper opportunity to commit and create a decisive operational breakthrough. And there are signs that the counteroffensive is having its effect, this desired effect upon the Russian armed forces, which have been continuing to take excessive casualties.
If it wouldn't be for this horrible Russian long-range missile attack, which killed several people in Lviv, which is far, far away from the lines, the front lines. It's on the border of Poland. Lvov is not too far away from Poland. Yep. And yet it was devastated by missile strikes and several people were killed. If it wouldn't be for that, Ukraine would be actually its very, very healthy position of being absolutely ready to attack Russian position at any time once the circumstances, the weaknesses would be found and prepared and so on. It received a lot of weapons and ammunition from the West. So this is Ukrainian army on its peak in the last several years, in tens of years, maybe even all the history of Ukraine. Ukraine never be so strong and unified as well as it is now. So right now it's already, by all standards, it's a great force, which actually I don't see any reason why NATO wouldn't like to have such a force joining an alliance, if not for the responsibility of NATO, if Ukraine would join, let's see, tomorrow, for example. So there would be a responsibility to defend it if attacked by a third country. And in our case, we don't have to look hard enough for a third country that would attack Ukraine. It's Russia. It's old Russia, which will immediately attack. And sometimes somebody asked me once, do Russians have nothing better to do than to attack its neighbor, killing hundreds of thousands of people? For what? I got lost. I couldn't explain.
About the best answer you could give them is that the Russian for whatever reason, probably due to the fact that Russia itself has been invaded not quite a number of times in its history, but the fact that the Russian concept of security, they express it best in their word "безопасность," which means without danger. Such a concept of security is more absolute than we in the West. we think of security as relative freedom of act from attack, not in an absolute sense, such as the Russians would mean it. In order for, in other words, in order for Russia to feel secure in the sense that it understands it, its neighbors must all be insecure by definition, either insecure or subservient or dominated in one form or another. The former Soviet Union had this kind of security during the Cold War, with its Warsaw Pact members being occupied, and they were occupied or otherwise subservient to Russia, and it had for a while there during the Cold War the kind of security that it was looking for. But its need for that kind of absolute security created corresponding insecurity on the part of its neighbors and on the part of NATO. That's why NATO was formed to begin with.
But if any time that Russia was indeed quite insecure, it was the 90s, right after the fall of the Soviet Union. So Russia was very weak financially, technologically, from military point of view, just from any point of view, it was very weak. Yet the West didn't attack Russia. In fact, the West was trying to help Russia any way they could. They sent food, they sent all kind of stuff. Their businessmen organized a lot of joint ventures with Russia. Of course, all of them lost the money. And it was only when the high oil prices kicked in the early 2000s and Putin became in power, that's where things became very, very different. Again, there was no any signals whatsoever that West is preparing an imminent attack against Russia or anything at all. In fact, there were even attempts when I remember, if I'm correct, when Obama came to power, there was idea of перезагрузка, so-called, to recharge everything was going on, recharge, starts anew, or so on. But we know what's happened. That a couple of years later, Putin attacked Georgia, and then annexed Crimea, and then so the recharging mechanism didn't work out that well. Actually, maybe it was even a show of weakness to Putin. Oh, they're scared of us, so let's go and start. And it's also, I remember from chess, the best defense is an attack. So if you want to defend your country, you attack other countries. That's how you play perfect defense.
Well, I know chess players who are absolutely deadly when they have a queen sacrifice, use a queen sacrifice to achieve checkmate within one or two moves.
Of
That's a
course.
that's a that's an in chess, that's an expression of using an attack or sacrifice as the best form of defense, a preemptive strike.
Yeah, but you see, in Russia's case, they do preemptive strikes, and so far there is not much success with the strikes.
As a matter of fact, as I point out, in the Russian perception, they were doing a lot of mirror imaging or projection of their own thinking onto the West, and they were essentially, during the entire Cold War, they were accusing the United States of preparing a preemptive strike attack on the Soviet Union, and the only thing that was preventing the United States from undertaking such a preemptive strike as a prelude to a preventive war was the Soviet nuclear arsenal, starting in it's a Soviet nuclear arsenal capable of striking the United States beginning in 1957.
Mhm.
And the Cuban Missile Crisis only accelerated the Russian desire to expand their nuclear arsenal. They did not want to be caught in a position of nuclear inferiority, such as they were during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Uh, Jonathan, there are a lot of comparisons with the present situation and the Cuban crisis in 1962. In 1962, the situation was mm, very obvious. Okay, here is the United States, here is the Soviet Union. They can annihilate each other several times, probably. So, is it worth to both countries to start such a horrible war, or it's better to come to some kind of an agreement, which is exactly what happened. And it was logical. Again, both countries, they showed strength, they showed weakness at the same time, or at least readiness to compromise. Uh, what's happened?
Keep in mind that was that the Soviet leader was Khrushchev at that time,
Yes,
a very unusual man in terms of Soviet leaders, in that I would argue that Khrushchev was trying to attain nuclear parity with the United States, shall we say, on the cheap, by simply creating a forward base in Cuba with short to medium range nuclear missiles, thereby converting them, in effect, to intercontinental missiles. They would have the same effect as intercontinental missiles, and by doing much more cheaply
and
uh,
faster.
and
Much
faster,
to achieve.
they would have accelerated it. Uh, but the ending of the Cuban Missile Crisis forced the Soviet Union to, in order to have an intercontinental strike capability, they had to rely more on its land-based ICBMs and develop submarine-based missiles. So it's much more expensive for the Soviet Union to improve its nuclear arsenal based upon that. So anyway, there are comparisons between the Cuban Missile Crisis and today, but in this case, you have really, if Putin, if they were to unleash a nuclear attack of any kind, we've already shown that, at least at the operational level, that we have a very credible.
The aftermath of Hurricane Ian will leave many in need of aid. For 30 years, Neighbors for Neighbors has been at the forefront of disaster recovery. We are connected directly with those in the affected areas. Neighbors for Neighbors and our partners at Global Empowerment Mission are working to raise the much-needed funds to help provide relief and recovery to the devastated areas. Donate today at neighborsforneighbors.org. Join our efforts and help us connect those in need with those who need our help.
Well, okay.
How that happened?
I have no idea how that happened. All of a sudden, we're preempted by it. Now, a word from our sponsors. Okay.
I don't need sponsors. I don't need sponsors, and I don't want sponsors. So
That's
please,
okay.
never do that again. Whoever allowed this interruption.
I have no idea how that happened. But in any case, what most observers tend to forget in trying to draw comparisons is that in this case, you have an aggressor who has already launched a war. There was no prior war. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a confrontation, but there was no war in progress at the time. Now, in this case, you have an aggressive war launched against Russia, against Ukraine, although technically not a member of NATO, nevertheless presented a great enough danger to NATO that it actually accelerated NATO's expansion to Sweden and Finland, and had the opposite effect of what Russia intended through its invasion of Ukraine. They thought that their nuclear arsenal would give them sufficient leverage and cover to intimidate the West from intervening effectively against an occupation of Ukraine. And in this case, Putin miscalculated on several levels. He overestimated the ability of his own armed forces to get the job done. He underestimated the ability and willingness of Ukraine to resist effectively, and he also miscalculated on the reaction by NATO nations. It galvanized NATO and has unified NATO the way it hasn't been since the end of the Cold War. So, really, this is not a comparable situation to the Cuban Missile Crisis.
On many levels.
On several levels. It's a false analogy.
Yeah, there is no analogy in my opinion whatsoever, and the confrontation, if such a case would be, it would be between Russia and probably the rest of the world. It's not just the United States; it's all NATO, and nobody will fight for Soviet Union or Russia. Even China now is quite critical about all this noise of Putin to use nuclear attacks, or even this Zaporozhye power station, nuclear power station, what's happening there. We all know about that. I don't want to repeat it one more time. However, we have a clip which Ivan
The
sent.
right clip this time.
The right one, yes. And let's see what's happened. Mark, please. Waiting for a clip.
Yes.
Are we?
Well, we hope so.
Can you imagine if the same clip will start playing again?
Right.
Oh my
If we
God.
get the same commercial. Oh, great. That's okay. Break out the finger puppets.
Okay, so Mark said the clip is ready. And we are ready as well.
We're ready, yes.
So if clip is ready and we are ready and everybody else is ready, let's play it.
I don't know how long we can strike these serious poses. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, any year now while we're still young.
I sort of looked into the latest issue of Foreign Affairs, and there was an article why NATO should close its door to Ukraine forever. And the argument is that if Ukraine becomes a member of NATO, so NATO has to protect the Ukraine. Now, even there, okay, let's leave it for just for a sec, because I want to remind Jonathan, and you confirm if I'm right, that the Article 5 to protect every member of NATO, it doesn't mean that, okay, here's say Romania is being attacked by Russia, okay? It doesn't mean that the intercontinental ballistic missiles from all the the submarines and sailors and planes from the United States and England and all other members will immediately retaliate against Russia because Romania was attacked. No, all will happen is consultations of how to help Romania, how to prevent any further attacks or how to deal with it and so on. Maybe it was accidental attack and so on and on and on. That's how it all works. So it doesn't mean that if Ukraine is a member of NATO, all next day NATO will have to fight with Russia for Ukrainian independence.
Essentially, the message that if and when Ukraine joins NATO, uh, the message sent that will be sent to Russia essentially is this, much as it was during the Cold War: attack any one of these member nations of NATO, and you have attacked the United States, and you are at war with the United States. That is the and that is the principal motivation why any NATO member, particularly those on the eastern flank, the Baltic states,
Yeah.
would want to have American troops, even if at a mostly symbolic level, stationed in those countries to act in effect as a tripwire.
Mhm.
So that if Russia were to attack any one of those eastern flank countries of NATO, then they would know they would automatically be involved with war with the United States because American servicemen and women would have been put at risk or killed. And so that's not but that is the principal motivation behind getting Ukraine into NATO, to solidify the NATO alliance and present an impenetrable barrier to Russia, to any attempts at Russian expansion, and to, in effect, act as an effective instrument for a new strategy of neo-containment.
So can you see, Jonathan, what a fool Putin really is? So result.
He did everything. His measures achieved the opposite of what he intended.
Finland, the border with Finland is 1,000 miles.
Something like 800 kilometers or something like that. It's a long border when you take a look at the map. He just at least doubled the length of frontier that Russia has to worry about.
Absolutely. Sweden is very strong industrial country, which is becoming member of NATO.
which they would be able to. They would provide a very solid backup to
And
Finland.
they have some very good weapons to supply NATO. They have some good um, uh, air fighters and some mm, tanks and haubits, and well, they have some interesting variation of weapons. And finally, Ukraine either will become very soon member of NATO, or it's on its way to become member of NATO. So now there is a real danger to Russia because as next, you know who will be the next member of NATO? Belarus. They will say, okay, Ukraine
Oh
did
yeah,
it, and everybody
yeah.
did it. The
Belarus could very well be Belarus could very well be persuaded by a successful conclusion to the Russian-Ukrainian war. They could be very well persuaded by its neighbors and Ukraine, especially, say, "Hey, join with us. Let's present a united front to Russia, and you will not have to worry about your independence. You will not have to worry about potentially being subservient to an expansionist Russia. You will have a solid alliance behind you, and you will actually experience freedom and independence more than you have ever experienced in your existence."
absolutely.
Belarus, with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Belarus became independent not by any of its own efforts. It became independent by default.
Absolutely.
Its previous oppressor had just disappeared. Okay, it could no longer exert influence. And Belarus, quite frankly, did not know what to do with all this newfound independence.
Well, we got a signal that the clip is ready. So
Hallelujah.
let's take it a look.
Let's go for
Let's
it.
see it. Yep.
Гуртожиток. Заснув спати. Скло.
What a tragic news is that. I remember several years ago I was in Lviv. It's a fantastic, beautiful city close to the border of Poland. Um, I don't have even words to describe what Russia is doing these days. There is no forgiveness, never, and it just has to be end. And hopefully, this upcoming summit in Vilnius will deal with that and other horrible atrocities so far, and will probably make sure that Ukraine will be given finally the required weapons to not only defend itself but kick Russians from their territory, especially Crimea. That will spell the end of Putin's regime. I honestly believe so. Jonathan, you agree with this?
Oh, certainly. I mean, right now the Russian-Ukrainian war is a playing out of two politically irreconcilable objectives: Ukrainian independence versus restoration of the Russian Empire. Those are the two political objectives which are in play, and they cannot be reconciled. They cannot be reconciled peacefully. They can only be reconciled with the victory of one or the other, where the attainment of Ukrainian independence means the death of any political objective, any political reunification of the Russian Empire. And the Russians, so far, or at least the Russian leadership, or at least Putin, is unwilling to reconcile themselves to the permanent loss of Ukraine as part of a reunified Russian Empire. And until they can be compelled to accept that, they must be compelled to accept this peace. And it will have to be peace. It must be peace on Ukrainian terms. Otherwise, we are caught in a forever war, in indefinite conflict, no war, no peace. And that simply is not satisfactory.
Okay, Jonathan, thank you very much for today's program. I'm looking forward, and hopefully we will see some positive news very soon next week as the NATO summit in Vilnius. And in the meantime, have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll see you Tuesday, same place, same time. Bye bye, everybody.